Welcome to ASMR History Whisperer, where the secrets of the past come alive in a whisper. Relax as we explore the stories that shaped our world. Today, we embark on a journey into the distant past, to a time when gods walked among mortals, heroes were born from legend, and a single war would echo through the ages, the Trojan War. This is no ordinary conflict. It's a tale of love and betrayal, bravery and vengeance, where the fate of an entire city hangs in the balance. For centuries, poets and storytellers have recounted this epic saga, but what really happened on the plains of Troy? Was it a real war, or merely a myth crafted by the ancient Greeks? Join us as we uncover the layers of history and legend that have kept this story alive for over 3,000 years. In this video, we'll explore the origins of the war, sparked by a divine quarrel and a fateful decision that led to the infamous judgment of Paris. We'll meet the larger-than-life figures who fought on both sides: Achilles, the nearly invincible Greek warrior; Hector, the noble defender of Troy; and Helen, whose beauty ignited the flames of war. As we follow the decade-long siege of Troy, you'll discover the cunning strategies and brutal battles that defined the conflict, culminating in the greatest deception of all, the Trojan Horse. But the story doesn't end with Troy's fall. It's a tale filled with tragedy, divine retribution, and the haunting question: was it all destined by the gods, or driven by the desires and ambitions of men? Prepare to be drawn into a world where history and myth collide, and where the true story of the Trojan War remains one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Will we ever know what truly happened? Let's dive in and see what secrets we can uncover. Our story truly begins long before the war itself, in the realm of the gods, where a seemingly trivial event would ignite the flames of a conflict that would span years and lead to the fall of one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. It all started with a wedding, one that was supposed to be a joyous occasion but instead became the spark that lit the fire of war. The wedding was between Thetis, a beautiful sea nymph known for her grace and wisdom, and Peleus, a mortal king of Thessaly. The union of a divine being with a mortal was rare and celebrated by the gods. Zeus himself, the king of the gods, organized the grand feast, inviting all the deities of Olympus to attend. All, that is, except one, Eris, the goddess of discord and strife. Known for sowing chaos wherever she went, Eris was deliberately left off the guest list, as no one wanted her disruptive influence to mar the celebration. Eris, however, was not one to be slighted. In her anger and spite, she devised a plan to stir up trouble at the wedding. She crafted a golden apple, inscribed with the words "to the fairest," and, unnoticed by the other guests, rolled it into the midst of the feast. The apple immediately caught the attention of three powerful goddesses: Hera, the queen of the gods; Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Each goddess claimed the apple for herself, believing she was the fairest of them all. The argument between the goddesses grew heated, and the joyous celebration was quickly overshadowed by their quarrel. The guests watched in uncomfortable silence as the three goddesses turned to Zeus, demanding that he settle the dispute and declare who was truly the fairest. But Zeus, wise and shrewd, knew that choosing one goddess over the others would only lead to trouble. He decided to pass the responsibility to someone else, someone who could make the decision without risking the wrath of the rejected goddesses. And so, Zeus chose Paris, a young prince of Troy, to judge the contest. Paris was known for his fairness and had once been a simple shepherd, living a peaceful life on Mount Ida, unaware of his royal heritage. Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger god, to bring the three goddesses to Paris, and the young prince suddenly found himself thrust into a divine conflict that would change his life and the fate of his city forever. When the goddesses appeared before Paris, each tried to win his favor by offering him a bribe. Hera, the queen of the gods, promised Paris immense power and rule over all of Asia if he chose her as the fairest. Athena, with her wisdom and strategic mind, offered him unmatched skill in battle and the knowledge that would make him invincible in war. But it was Aphrodite who made the most tempting offer, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta, the wife of King Menelaus. Paris, young and swayed by the allure of love and beauty, awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite. This choice, seemingly personal and inconsequential, set off a chain of events that would lead to one of the most famous wars in history. For in choosing Aphrodite, Paris earned the eternal enmity of Hera and Athena, and he unknowingly set the stage for the abduction of Helen, which would provoke the Greeks into launching 1,000 ships to lay siege to Troy. The seeds of the Trojan War were sown, and the conflict that would soon engulf the Aegean was no longer a matter of if, but when. Paris, now under the protection of Aphrodite, would soon travel to Sparta, where his fateful meeting with Helen would ignite the passions and hostilities that would bring heroes and gods alike to the walls of Troy. While the mythological tales of gods and goddesses, divine judgments, and epic battles have captured imaginations for millennia, there is also a historical side to the Trojan War, one that scholars and archaeologists have sought to uncover for centuries. Although the events are shrouded in legend, many believe there is a kernel of truth behind the story of Troy, a real city that once stood at the crossroads of civilizations and became the center of a legendary conflict. The city of Troy, known as Iliad in ancient times, was located in what is now northwestern Turkey. It was strategically positioned near the entrance to the Dardanelles, a vital waterway connecting the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara and beyond to the Black Sea. This location made Troy a key hub for trade and commerce, as well as a point of strategic military importance. Control of Troy meant control of the trade routes between Asia and Europe, and it's likely that this geopolitical significance played a role in the conflicts that ultimately inspired the stories of the Trojan War. Archaeological evidence suggests that Troy was a thriving city for many centuries, with a complex and advanced society. Excavations at the site of Azarlik, identified as the likely location of ancient Troy, have revealed multiple layers of settlement, indicating that the city was destroyed and rebuilt several times over the course of its history. The most famous of these layers, known as Troy 7, is often associated with the period around the 12th or 13th century BCE, the time when the Trojan War is believed to have occurred. The historical context of the Trojan War is rooted in the Late Bronze Age, a time of great turmoil and shifting power dynamics in the Eastern Mediterranean. During this period, powerful kingdoms such as Mycenaean Greece, Hittite Anatolia, and the Egyptian New Kingdom were vying for dominance. The Mycenaeans, who were likely the Greeks described in Homer's epics, were a warrior culture known for their fortified palaces, elaborate tombs, and far-reaching trade networks. It is within this complex and interconnected world that the historical seeds of the Trojan War may have been planted. The Mycenaeans, expanding their influence across the Aegean and into Asia Minor, would have seen Troy as both a rival and a valuable prize. The conflict may have arisen from competition over trade routes, control of resources, or simply the desire for conquest and glory. While the details of the war as described in myth, the abduction of Helen, the involvement of gods, and the dramatic siege of Troy, are likely the product of poetic imagination, they may reflect real tensions and conflicts that took place during this era. The war, if it did occur, would have been a protracted and brutal campaign, with both sides suffering significant losses. The eventual fall of Troy, whether through treachery, as the myth of the Trojan Horse suggests, or through conventional warfare, would have been a monumental event, echoing through the oral traditions of the time and eventually being immortalized by poets like Homer. Thus, while the Trojan War as we know it is a blend of myth and history, it represents the intersection of legend with the real-world struggles of ancient civilizations. The search for the historical Troy continues to this day, with each archaeological discovery bringing us closer to understanding the truth behind the epic saga that has fascinated humanity for over 3 millennia. As we move from myth to history, we find that the story of Troy is not just a tale told by poets, but a real place with tangible evidence of its existence and significance in the ancient world. The archaeological site of Azarlik, located in modern-day Turkey, is widely accepted as the location of ancient Troy, thanks to extensive excavations that have uncovered layers of settlement dating back thousands of years. The first major breakthrough in identifying the historical Troy came in the late 19th century, when German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann began his excavations at Azarlik. Guided by the descriptions in Homer's Iliad, Schliemann believed he could find the remains of the legendary city. His work uncovered several layers of ruins, each representing a different period in Troy's long history. Schliemann's most famous discovery was what he called Priam's treasure, a collection of gold and other artifacts, which he believed belonged to the Trojan king mentioned in the Iliad. However, later analysis suggested that this treasure actually came from a much earlier period than the time traditionally associated with the Trojan War. Despite some controversy surrounding Schliemann's methods and conclusions, his work laid the foundation for future research. More systematic excavations were carried out in the 20th and 21st centuries, led by archaeologists such as Wilhelm Dorpfeld and Manfred Korfmann. These efforts have revealed a complex site with multiple layers of settlement, indicating that Troy was inhabited from the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE, until the Roman period. The most relevant layer for the Trojan War is known as Troy 7, which dates to around the 12th or 13th century BCE. This layer shows evidence of a significant city with substantial fortifications, including thick walls and towers that would have made it a formidable stronghold. Archaeologists have found signs of destruction at this level, including charred remains and arrowheads, suggesting that the city may have been attacked and burned, circumstantial evidence that aligns with the story of a devastating war. In addition to the physical remains of Troy itself, there are other historical records that provide context for the events that might have inspired the legend. The Hittite Empire, which was a major power in Anatolia during the late Bronze Age, left behind written records that mention a city called Walusa, which many scholars believe to be the Hittite name for Troy. These records describe diplomatic relations and conflicts between the Hittites and a kingdom called Ahiwa, which is thought to be the Hittite term for the Mycenaeans of Greece. One particularly intriguing document is the so-called Treaty of Alexandru, a peace treaty between the Hittite king Muwatalli II and a ruler of Walusa named Alexandru, a name that some scholars connect to the Trojan prince Alexander, better known as Paris. While this connection is speculative, it adds to the possibility that the legends of Troy were rooted in real historical events and figures. Moreover, the wider context of the late Bronze Age collapse, a period marked by the fall of several major civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean, supports the idea that the Trojan War, if it occurred, took place during a time of great upheaval. Trade networks were disrupted, cities were destroyed, and populations were displaced, creating an environment in which a war like the one described in the Iliad could plausibly have occurred. Thus, while the exact details of the Trojan War may remain a mystery, the archaeological and historical evidence suggests that there was indeed a significant city at Troy, one that was likely involved in the complex political and military struggles of the time. The destruction of this city, whether by a Greek coalition or another force, left a legacy that was remembered and embellished in the stories that would eventually become the Iliad and the broader Trojan cycle of myths. As we move closer to the outbreak of war, the focus shifts from the broader geopolitical context to the key figures who may have played central roles in the historical events that inspired the legend of the Trojan War. One of the most prominent figures is Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, who is often depicted as the leader of the Greek forces in the Iliad. Historically, Mycenae was one of the most powerful city-states in Greece during the Late Bronze Age, and Agamemnon's role as a leader in a potential coalition against Troy is plausible given Mycenae's dominance in the region. Agamemnon's desire to assert control over key trade routes and expand his influence could have driven him to lead an expedition against Troy. Another critical character is Menelaus, the king of Sparta and the brother of Agamemnon. According to legend, the abduction of his wife, Helen, by Paris of Troy was the immediate cause of the war. On the Trojan side, King Priam ruled over a city that was both prosperous and strategically significant. Priam's role in the conflict would have been to defend his city against the Greek coalition, using both his own resources and the support of his allies. Hector, Priam's eldest son and the city's foremost warrior, is depicted as the primary defender of Troy in the Iliad. Historically, Troy's military strength would have relied on both its strong fortifications and the leadership of figures like Hector. As tensions mounted between Mycenae and Troy, the reasons for conflict would have extended beyond the personal grievances of kings and princes. Control of the Dardanelles, access to valuable trade routes, and the desire to assert dominance in the region would have all been contributing factors. The Mycenaeans, under Agamemnon's leadership, may have seen an opportunity to eliminate a powerful rival and secure their influence over the Aegean and beyond. The actual spark that ignited the war could have been a relatively minor incident, such as a trade dispute, piracy, or a diplomatic slight. In the ancient world, such incidents often escalated quickly, especially when powerful leaders were involved. The decision to go to war would have been influenced by a complex interplay of political, economic, and personal motivations. Once the decision was made, the Mycenaean Greeks would have begun to assemble a coalition of forces from across the Greek world. This coalition would have included contingents from various city-states, each bringing their own ships, soldiers, and resources. The journey to Troy, likely involving a large fleet, would have been a significant undertaking, requiring extensive planning and coordination. The Trojans, aware of the looming threat, would have prepared for the possibility of a siege. The city's fortifications, which were formidable by the standards of the time, would have been strengthened, and alliances with neighboring regions would have been solidified to ensure support during the conflict. As the Greek fleet set sail across the Aegean, the stage was set for a conflict that would resonate through history, blending fact and fiction into the epic tale that we know today as the Trojan War. The actual conflict, whatever its true nature, would have involved prolonged sieges, battles fought both on land and at sea, and a struggle not just for control of a city, but for dominance in the ancient world. As the Greek coalition assembled under Agamemnon set sail for Troy, the journey marked the beginning of what would become a decade-long conflict. According to the Iliad, the Greeks landed on the shores of Troy, ready to lay siege to the city in a war that would pit some of the most famous heroes of antiquity against each other. But what does the archaeological and historical evidence tell us about these initial stages of the war? In the Iliad, Homer describes how the Greek fleet, consisting of 1,000 ships, crossed the Aegean Sea and landed on the beaches near Troy. This massive armada, led by the greatest warriors of the age, Agamemnon, Achilles, Odysseus, and others, was prepared for a swift victory. However, the reality of ancient warfare suggests that the logistics of such an expedition would have been far more complex and challenging. The Mycenaean Greeks, known for their naval prowess, likely did send a significant force to Troy, but the size of the fleet and the number of warriors involved would have been smaller than the legendary 1,000 ships. Once the Greeks landed, they would have faced the daunting task of besieging a well-fortified city. Troy's walls, as revealed by archaeological excavations, were thick and imposing, designed to withstand prolonged sieges. These fortifications were among the strongest in the ancient world, and any attacking force would have needed to bring not only soldiers but also siege engines and supplies to sustain a long campaign. In the Iliad, the early stages of the war are marked by a series of skirmishes and duels between key figures on both sides. Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, plays a central role, his rage and pride driving much of the narrative. Historically, such duels were not uncommon in ancient warfare, where individual combat between champions could decide the outcome of battles or even influence the course of a war. These duels, however, were likely romanticized by later storytellers to emphasize the heroism and personal valor of the combatants. The Iliad also tells of how the Greeks initially struggled to breach Troy's defenses, leading to a stalemate that dragged on for years. This is consistent with what we know about siege warfare in the ancient world. Without modern artillery, besieging a well-defended city like Troy would have been an arduous and time-consuming process. The attackers would have had to cut off the city's supplies, launch repeated assaults on the walls, and attempt to weaken the defenders through attrition. The Greek camp, established on the plains outside Troy, became a base of operations from which they launched their attacks. Archaeological evidence suggests that the plains of Troy could have supported such an encampment, with access to fresh water and resources necessary to sustain the Greek forces. Over time, however, the difficulties of maintaining a long-term siege would have taken their toll, leading to frustrations and internal conflicts within the Greek camp as depicted in the Iliad. One of the most famous episodes early in the Iliad is the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon, which leads to Achilles withdrawing from the battle. This conflict centers around the division of spoils and the honor of the warriors, key elements in the warrior culture of the Mycenaeans. Historically, such disputes among leaders could have weakened the cohesion of the Greek forces, prolonging the siege and complicating their efforts to take the city. Meanwhile, inside Troy, King Priam and his sons, including Hector, prepared the city for the long siege. The Trojans, bolstered by their strong defenses and the support of their allies from nearby regions, were able to resist the Greek assaults. Hector, as Troy's leading warrior, took on the role of defending the city, leading counterattacks against the Greeks and attempting to break the siege. The Iliad portrays Hector as a noble and tragic figure, fully aware of the peril facing his city but determined to fight on. As the siege dragged on, both sides suffered from the prolonged conflict. Supplies dwindled, morale fluctuated, and the warriors on both sides faced the daily grind of battle and the constant threat of death. This period of the war is marked by a series of brutal confrontations, both in open battle and in smaller raids and skirmishes. The war's toll on the warriors is a central theme in the Iliad, reflecting the harsh realities of ancient warfare. Historically, it is likely that the war was not a continuous series of battles, but rather a drawn-out conflict with periods of intense fighting interspersed with lulls in the action. The Greeks, unable to breach the walls of Troy through direct assault, may have attempted to cut off the city's supply lines, conducting raids on nearby settlements and trying to starve the Trojans into submission. The Iliad also introduces the role of the gods in the conflict, with various deities taking sides and intervening in the affairs of mortals. While the presence of gods on the battlefield is a mythological element, it reflects the belief in divine influence over human affairs that was pervasive in the ancient world. The Greeks and Trojans alike would have sought the favor of their gods, offering sacrifices and interpreting omens as they fought for survival. As the war continued, the initial hope of a quick victory faded, and the reality of a protracted and costly siege set in. The Greek leaders, faced with internal divisions and the growing strength of the Trojan defenses, would have had to reassess their strategies. This period of the war, marked by both heroic deeds and deep suffering, set the stage for the eventual fall of Troy, though not without further twists and turns in the tale. The war intensifies, Achilles and the death of Patroclus. As the years of conflict wore on, the siege of Troy became a war of attrition, with both sides suffering from exhaustion, dwindling resources, and the relentless pressure of battle. The Greek forces, despite their superior numbers and the legendary warriors among them, found themselves locked in a stalemate against the formidable walls of Troy. The city's defenses, built to withstand the most determined of sieges, held firm, and the Trojans, led by their prince Hector, continued to resist the Greek assaults with remarkable tenacity. The turning point in the Greek camp came with the conflict between Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, and Agamemnon, the leader of the coalition. This dispute, as described in the Iliad, was rooted in issues of honor and pride, central values in the warrior culture of the Mycenaeans. When Agamemnon claimed Briseis, a war prize awarded to Achilles, the latter's anger and sense of dishonor led him to withdraw from the battle, refusing to fight for a cause that no longer respected his worth. Achilles' withdrawal was a significant blow to the Greek forces. Known for his unmatched prowess in battle, Achilles was not just a warrior, but a symbol of Greek martial superiority. His absence from the battlefield demoralized the Greeks and emboldened the Trojans, who took the opportunity to press their advantage. Under Hector's leadership, the Trojans launched a series of counterattacks that pushed the Greeks back towards their ships, threatening to destroy their means of retreat and survival. As the pressure mounted, the Greeks found themselves in a dire situation. The Trojans, taking advantage of Achilles' absence, managed to breach the Greek defenses and set fire to some of their ships. The Greek camp was on the brink of collapse, and it was at this critical juncture that Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, stepped forward. Desperate to turn the tide, Patroclus donned Achilles' armor and led the Myrmidons, Achilles' elite warriors, into battle, hoping to rally the Greek forces and drive the Trojans back. Patroclus' entry into the battle marked a brief resurgence for the Greeks. Believing Achilles had returned to the fight, the Trojans initially faltered, allowing the Greeks to regain some ground. However, Patroclus, though brave, was not Achilles. His courage carried him deep into the Trojan lines, but it also led to his downfall. In the heat of battle, Patroclus encountered Hector, the mightiest of the Trojan warriors. A fierce duel ensued, one that ended with Hector killing Patroclus and stripping him of Achilles' armor. The death of Patroclus was a devastating blow, not just strategically but emotionally. For Achilles, it was a turning point that reignited his fury and desire for vengeance. Historically, the loss of a key figure like Patroclus would have had a significant impact on the morale and cohesion of the Greek forces. The bond between Achilles and Patroclus, often interpreted as one of deep friendship or even brotherhood, was a powerful element in the narrative of the war, underscoring the human cost of the conflict. The return of Achilles. Achilles returned to the battlefield, fueled by grief and rage over Patroclus' death, is one of the most dramatic moments in the Iliad. Historically, his re-entry into the war symbolizes the renewed vigor and determination of the Greek forces. When Achilles finally rejoined the battle, his presence alone was enough to instill fear in the hearts of the Trojans. His return marked a shift in the balance of power as the Greeks, reinvigorated by their greatest warrior, began to push back against the Trojans with renewed ferocity. Achilles' wrath was directed primarily at Hector, whom he blamed for the death of Patroclus. The duel between Achilles and Hector, as described in the Iliad, is not just a clash of warriors but a confrontation between two opposing forces, one driven by honor and duty, the other by vengeance and grief. Historically, such a duel, while perhaps not as stylized as the epic depicts, could have represented a critical moment in the war, with the outcome influencing the morale and strategy of both sides. The duel ends with Achilles slaying Hector and, in a display of his unrelenting fury, dragging Hector's body around the walls of Troy. This act of desecration, shocking even by the standards of ancient warfare, highlights the depths of Achilles' grief and rage. It also serves as a stark reminder of the brutal realities of war, where honor could be overshadowed by the desire for revenge. For the Trojans, the loss of Hector was a catastrophic blow. As their greatest warrior and a beloved prince, Hector had been the linchpin of their defense. His death left Troy vulnerable, both militarily and emotionally, as the city's defenders mourned the loss of their hero. The siege continues. Despite Hector's death, the war did not end immediately. The siege of Troy continued, with both sides enduring further hardships and losses. The Greeks, although reinvigorated by Achilles' return, still faced the formidable task of breaching Troy's walls. The Trojans, now without Hector, were forced into a more defensive posture, relying on their fortifications and remaining warriors to hold off the Greek onslaught. During this period, the Iliad introduces various episodes that reflect the war's toll on both the Greek and Trojan sides. These stories, while often focusing on individual heroism and tragedy, also hint at the broader strategic challenges faced by both armies. For the Greeks, the prolonged siege strained their resources and morale. For the Trojans, the constant pressure from the Greeks and the loss of key leaders like Hector gradually eroded their ability to resist. With Hector's death, Troy was left reeling. He had been more than just the city's greatest warrior, he was the symbol of Trojan resilience and hope. The loss of Hector deeply demoralized the Trojans. Inside the city walls, there would have been a palpable sense of dread as the defenders realized that their most capable leader was gone. Priam, the aging king of Troy, was heartbroken, not just for the loss of his son, but for what Hector's death signified, the impending fall of his beloved city. Despite the grief and fear gripping Troy, the city's defenders continued to hold out, driven by a combination of duty, desperation, and the hope that perhaps the gods would still intervene on their behalf. The war, however, had taken a toll on both sides. The Greeks, though bolstered by Achilles' return, were also worn down by the years of fighting, the constant sieges, and the loss of their own comrades. During this period, the Greeks may have explored alternative strategies to bring the war to a close. Direct assaults had proven costly and largely ineffective against Troy's massive walls. Instead, the Greeks might have turned to psychological tactics, aiming to break the Trojan spirit and force them into surrender. The Trojan Horse, a masterstroke of deception. One of the most enduring and famous stories from the Trojan War is the tale of the Trojan Horse. According to the legend, after years of stalemate, the Greeks devised a cunning plan to infiltrate the city of Troy. The idea, attributed to Odysseus, was to construct a massive wooden horse, hollowed out to conceal a select group of Greek warriors inside. The Greeks then pretended to abandon their siege, leaving the horse as an apparent offering to the gods, symbolizing their supposed retreat and the end of the war. From a historical perspective, the story of the Trojan Horse, while likely embellished by later generations, could reflect a real incident of trickery or deception. In ancient warfare, the use of ruses and psychological tactics was not uncommon. The Greeks, facing an impregnable fortress and dwindling resources, may have resorted to such a tactic as a last-ditch effort to achieve victory. The Trojans, weary of the prolonged siege and eager to believe that the Greeks had finally given up, brought the wooden horse into the city as a trophy. According to the myth, despite warnings from some, like the priest Laocoon, who famously declared, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," the Trojans celebrated what they believed to be the end of the war. That night, as the city slept, the Greek warriors hidden inside the horse emerged, opened the city gates, and signaled to the main Greek force, which had secretly returned under the cover of darkness. The fall of Troy. The entry of the Greek forces into the heart of Troy marked the beginning of the city's final, tragic hours. The Greeks, having finally breached the city's defenses, unleashed their fury upon the Trojans. The sacking of Troy was brutal and merciless, a scene of widespread destruction, looting, and slaughter. The once great city, which had stood against the might of the Greek coalition for so many years, was reduced to ruins in a single night. The fall of Troy, as recounted in various ancient sources, was not just a military victory but also a moral and emotional turning point. The Greeks, who had fought for so long, took their revenge with a terrible ferocity. Men were killed, women and children were enslaved, and the city itself was set ablaze. The burning of Troy became a symbol of the war's devastating cost, not just in terms of lives lost, but in the cultural and civilizational destruction that accompanied it. Among the most heart-wrenching moments was the fate of the Trojan royal family. Priam, the once proud king, was slain at the altar of Zeus by Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, in a brutal act that symbolized the total defeat of Troy. Queen Hecuba, Hector's mother, was captured and enslaved, and Andromache, Hector's widow, was also taken as a slave, her son Astyanax thrown from the city walls to prevent him from growing up and seeking revenge. For the surviving Trojans, the fall of their city marked the end of their world. The survivors were scattered, with some fleeing to distant lands to establish new homes, while others were taken as spoils of war. The destruction of Troy echoed through the ancient world, becoming a story of both caution and lamentation, a reminder of the impermanence of even the greatest of cities. Historical reflections on the fall of Troy. Historically, the fall of a city like Troy would have had significant repercussions. The destruction of Troy likely weakened the power dynamics in the region, removing a key player from the geopolitical landscape of the Late Bronze Age. The Greeks, particularly the Mycenaeans, would have gained not only wealth and slaves from the sack of Troy but also control over the strategic trade routes that the city had once dominated. However, the victory came at a high cost for the Greeks as well. The long years of warfare, the internal conflicts, and the loss of so many heroes took a toll on the Greek world. The Mycenaean civilization, which had reached its peak during this period, would soon enter a period of decline, leading to what is known as the Greek Dark Ages. The reasons for this decline are complex and multifaceted, but the Trojan War likely contributed to the exhaustion of resources and the destabilization of the region. In the centuries that followed, the story of Troy and its fall became deeply embedded in Greek culture and identity. The war was commemorated in epic poetry, most notably in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and in countless other works of literature, art, and drama. The tale of Troy's fall was also used as a moral lesson about the dangers of hubris, the consequences of divine wrath, and the tragic fate that can befall even the mightiest of cities. The legacy of the Trojan War in popular culture. The Trojan War, as one of the most enduring and iconic stories of the ancient world, has left a profound impact on popular culture, resonating through the centuries in literature, art, film, and other media. Its blend of heroism, tragedy, divine intervention, and human emotion has made it a rich source of inspiration for countless works of art and storytelling. In literature, the Trojan War's most famous retellings come from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, epic poems that have been central to Western literary tradition for over 2 millennia. The Iliad captures the intensity and emotion of the war, focusing on the wrath of Achilles and the human cost of the conflict, while the Odyssey follows the long journey of Odysseus as he tries to return home after the fall of Troy. These works have been studied, translated, and adapted countless times, influencing generations of writers, poets, and scholars. Beyond Homer, the story of Troy has inspired a vast array of literary works. From the tragedies of ancient Greek playwrights like Euripides and Aeschylus to medieval retellings such as Geoffrey Chaucer's Troilus and Chryside, the Trojan War has been reimagined in different cultural contexts, each adding new layers to the story. In more recent times, modern authors like David Malouf in Ransom and Madeline Miller in The Song of Achilles have revisited the Trojan War, bringing fresh perspectives and exploring the psychological and emotional depth of its characters. The Trojan War has also had a significant presence in visual arts. Ancient Greek pottery frequently depicted scenes from the war, such as the duel between Achilles and Hector or the Judgment of Paris. These images help to solidify the iconic status of these stories within the collective memory of the Greek world. During the Renaissance, artists like Pier Paul Rubens and Giovanni Domenico Tiepolo revisited these themes, creating grand paintings that captured the drama and grandeur of the war. In film and television, the Trojan War has been brought to life in various ways, reflecting the enduring fascination with this epic tale. One of the most notable adaptations is the 2004 film Troy, directed by Wolfgang Petersen and starring Brad Pitt as Achilles. The movie, while taking liberties with the source material, brought the story to a new generation, emphasizing the human drama and epic scale of the conflict. Other adaptations, such as the BBC series Troy, Fall of a City, have also explored the war, offering different interpretations and focusing on the complex characters and motivations behind the legendary events. Beyond specific adaptations, the themes and motifs of the Trojan War have permeated popular culture more broadly. The idea of the Trojan horse has become a universal metaphor for deception and cunning, used in contexts far removed from the original story. The characters of Achilles, Hector, and Helen have become archetypes, symbolizing concepts like heroism, nobility, and beauty. The Trojan War's influence extends even into modern politics, philosophy, and psychology, where it serves as a reference point for discussions about the nature of conflict, the impact of war on societies, and the role of fate and choice in human life. The war's complex characters and themes continue to offer rich material for analysis and reflection, ensuring that the story of Troy remains relevant and resonant in contemporary discussions. In sum, the Trojan War occupies a unique place in popular culture, standing as a symbol of both the grandeur and the tragedy of human history. Its stories have transcended time, continually reinterpreted and reimagined, each generation finding new meaning in the ancient conflict. The war's legacy is a testament to the power of myth and the enduring human fascination with stories that explore the deepest aspects of our nature: courage, love, honor, and the inevitable consequences of our choices. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the epic tale of the Trojan War. Whether you're drawn to the heroism of Achilles, the tragedy of Hector, or the timeless lessons embedded in this ancient story, the legacy of Troy continues to inspire and captivate. If you enjoyed this exploration, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. I look forward to diving into more fascinating stories from history with you. Until next time, keep exploring the echoes of the past.